Well, has also been talking about George Galway, Galloways, the suck up to Saddam Hussein, coming to Boston tonight also to raise money for Hamas. They're not being shy about it. It's not a Hamas link group. It's for Hamas. People are going to pay $1,000 a throw for a private little meet and greet. And then they're going to have an open event where tickets are $20, $10 for students. I can't wait to have students exposed to this idiot. One of the people who has taught me more about, well, first of all, you know, you can learn everything you need to know from George Galway by listening to George Galway.
You may think that those aeroplanes in this city on 9/11 came out of a clear blue sky. I believe they emerged out of a swamp of hatred created by us.
And not only that, but he also urged on victory to the Intifada, which was the wholesale indiscriminate murder of folks in Israel. Now he's coming to Boston. I couldn't think of anybody better to explain what an outrage this should be, if we in fact were what I think of as liberals, than liberal writer Christopher Hitchens, one of my favorite people in the media, one of my greatest days when I got to meet him on the set of one of Bill Maher's TV shows. Welcome back to 96.9. It's great to hear from you. Thanks for letting us bother you today.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry to hear about the local outbreak of pollution, though, in your fine neighborhood.
He's coming to town, and the media won't even cover it, Hitch, because they don't think they don't think, what's the big deal? You're raising money for Hamas. So what?
No. I'm all for giving him a platform as long as people can let him know what they think and ask him a few pointed questions. I could suggest a couple.
Okay, like what?
Topics. Well, he was suspended from the House of Commons after refusing, failing to comply with the legal obligation to declare all outside sources of income. That's a very grave thing to have happened to him. Mm-hmm. I forget how long the suspension was for, but it's even graver when you know what the source of income was. That's to say, it was money from the so-called Oil for Food program run by the United Nations and Saddam Hussein, which was used to buy political influence outside the country instead of spending it directly on the Iraqi people who were indeed, young and old, dying under those sanctions. So it was a direct theft from the mouths of the Iraqis, as well as a direct collusion with a regime that was genocidal.
You know, it's one thing to dispute...
Of that regime, George Galloway was the leading supporter in the world.
Exactly.
I mean, he traveled to Iraq, and we have tape and film of him saying to Saddam Hussein, "I salute you, sir, for your indefatigability." He has done the same with the Assad government dictatorship in Syria at the very moment when its forces in Lebanon were butchering opposition among Lebanese to the Syrian military occupation. He's called for holy war and described the attacks made by Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia on Iraqi civilians as martyrdom operations. He's been found by the bipartisan committee of the Senate and by a UN special inquiry into the Oil for Food program to have lied about his part in that disgusting business. Mm-hmm. It's really, he's a skunk. He's a rat.
And by the way, just so people didn't miss that, we're talking to Christopher Hitchens. It's one thing to say you didn't support the war in Iraq. It's another thing to defend Saddam Hussein, and that's what this guy who's coming to Boston tonight.
Very often, he was expelled also from the Parliamentary Labour Party, and that's very often written up in papers like the New York Times as follows. He was expelled for his opposition to the intervention in Iraq. That's not true. A large number of members of the Parliamentary Labour Party had the perfect right and exercised it to criticize or flat out oppose the use of British troops, but George Galloway was expelled for recommending and supporting violence against British soldiers. In other words, he's not anti-war at all.
Right.
He's very pro-war, but he's on the other side.
In fact, he
as
said
you heard, he's an apologist for Osama bin Laden as well as Saddam Hussein and Hafez al-Assad. I'm sorry, now it's Bashir al-Assad. It's a family.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We're talking to Christopher Hitchens, one of my favorite writers in the world today, and you wrote a great piece about how he said it would be completely reasonable for the Islamists to kill the Prime Minister of Great Britain.
Yes, well, he also defended, of course, the attacks of July 7th in London on the subway, said it was our fault. We'd brought it on ourselves. How can we expect to go peacefully onto the subway when we have a foreign policy that George Galloway doesn't agree with? Obviously, people have the right to take life at random if they object.
Here's what I'm trying to put together, and I'm not a liberal. I thought when I was young that I wanted to be one because I thought they were all like you. but then I found out what they're really like, and so I'm a proud member.
Well, Galloway, it's difficult. Galloway is a very peculiar kind of leftist. I mean, for one thing, his main propaganda and his main sources of income are supporting Islamist or fascist dictatorships, such as the Saddam Hussein one. For another, he said publicly that the worst day of his life was the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Good grief.
I think you're getting maybe a fairly clear picture of him.
Yeah.
But anyone who doesn't believe or thinks they might be inclined to doubt anything I say would find all this very, very easy to check. They could look up what I wrote about him a few years ago on Slate magazine. If you go to Slate, put in my name and his, you'll get quite a...
Well, I have some links at my blog here at the radio station already from prepping for the show this morning to your stuff. We're talking to Christopher Hitchens. But this is, so he's an odd figure, so I set him aside. Now explain this to me. He's coming to the shadow of Harvard to hang out in the most blue state in America, where he will be welcomed by people who are giving $1,000 apiece. Those are the liberals I don't understand. What kind of person gives this man money to take back to Hamas?
Well, I don't know who would be likely to pay money or indeed want to go to a Hamas supporting dinner anyway, but I would put Hamas on the extreme right wing of the Palestinian movement, of which I consider myself, by the way, to be a friend of self-determination and statehood for the Palestinians for a long time. In fact, I even used to know George Galloway very slightly on that basis, which is why he hates me so much. But I mean, Hamas is an organization that wants to keep women subordinate, that publishes the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a Nazi fabrication about a Jewish world conspiracy. This is not exactly a liberal organization,
and yet they're not going to have,
which makes war on the secular forces of Al-Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, as well as on its own people.
But here's what's interesting: they're not meeting in Alabama, they're not meeting in Tennessee, they're meeting in Alston, in the city of Boston tonight. And that's what I don't understand. Why isn't this guy being... I'll put it this way. If Ann Coulter or Glenn Beck showed up, there would be near riots. But this dirtbag can show up and people go, oh, sure, it's for Hamas. What a reasonable thing to do with your money.
Well, I just think that the better people are informed about it, but in particular about its choice of guest, the more in doubt they might become about such a deplorable...
So let me ask you, is it fair to say that and I know left and right gets a little confusing here, but is it fair to say that if President Obama is the centerpiece of the left, that the left in America is either soft on terror or tolerant of terrorism as long as it's the right kind of terrorism?
A great chunk of the left, not all of it,
sure.
But, I would say something like a strategic majority of the hard left anyway, views Islamist fascism, even in its Al-Qaeda form, as in some perverted way a sort of liberation theology. They think of it as anti-imperialistic. And if you think, as many of them do, that the main enemy in the world is American-sponsored globalized capitalism, you perhaps saw Osama bin Laden's last communique, in which he urged us all to read Noam Chomsky and worry more about climate change. A very suggestive shift of emphasis on his part, away from things like killing Jews, repressing women, torturing and murdering homosexuals and other progressive causes. But it seems that these things are now being made compatible. I watched this with an ironic eye, I have to say.
And as well you should. Apparently you can double up on the number of virgins you get if you blow everyone up with a hybrid or fuel-efficient vehicle. This is very good to know from Osama bin Laden. Christopher Hitchens, how do you think President Obama has done as president his first year in office?
I think he gave himself a B+. I don't think that was overstating it. I've been reading this book, Game Changer, over the...
Yes.
One of the authors, I should say, is a friend of mine. And I have to say, when I finished reading that, I absolutely did not regret my vote for then-Senator Obama at all, and I still don't. So that's one answer to your question. But, I mean, the problem with him, I think, and it shows in his... question time with the Republicans the other day in Baltimore, as well as some of his speeches at the UN and elsewhere. He thinks that a lot of differences in politics and disagreements arise from misunderstanding. He doesn't realize, or if he does realize, he tries to mask the realization that there are real conflicts of interest in politics, and there are certain things that are incompatible, such as, for example, I would say, the existence of our society, and for very much longer, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now that it's become run by the Revolutionary Guards, who've taken over